why don't we go ahead and get started? And if we have a couple late stragglers, I'll let them in as they come in, so not to disrupt the presentation. So thank you so much for everyone who's here. Welcome to our the Division of Criminal, words. All right, let's start over. Caffeine, it's not in my blood. So welcome to ASC's Division of Cybercrime's Best Practices in Teaching Cyber. We're very excited to have everyone here, and I'm very, very thrilled to listen to our panel of expert scholars, and I appreciate their time. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first presenter, and what we'll do, if that's okay with everyone, is we'll let each presenter speak and give their examples and, you know, kind of have a discussion about what they like to utilize in the classroom, and then we'll save Q&A at the end. And when we do that, you can put your questions in the chat box and I'm happy to read them for you, or you can raise your electronic hand and I'll be happy to call on you and you can speak to the presenters. So I'm very excited to announce first is Dr. Shelley Clevenger from Sam Houston State University. Shelley, take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm super excited to be here. So I have taught cybercrime. Previously, I've taught it online and I've also taught it in person. And now that I'm at Sam Houston, I'm going to be teaching a class called Cyber Victimizations because I'm the department chair for the Department of Victim Studies. So everything focuses on victimization. And I'm going to show you a slide here and I'm going to talk about it. So let me share my screen. Hopefully it works. It's going to be like I'm teaching you all. And I'll ask you if you can see it. Okay, so let me get in here. And my cat's coming up, of course. Okay, so can you see that slide that I put up there?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things I wanted to talk about today that I do in cybercrime is that I have my students create comic books or children's books that explain cybercrime to children. And we actually go out into the world and give these books to kids. So you can see in that picture that I have up there, it is my students. We took this to a local homeless shelter. So the assignment was to make a comic book that would be, you know, ages 6 to 12 that would explain some aspect of cybercrime. And so there were two examples there in this picture. One was talking about catfishing because at the time the show Catfish was really big. There was lots of stories of catfishing. So they were talking about impersonation online. And then the students did a really cool comic book there. You can see it's a little blurry, but it's the Lego Avengers. And so it's the Lego Avengers fighting cybercrime. And so we took these comic books and we went to the homeless shelter and we read them to the kids and we had Halloween candy because it was Halloween time and they got to learn about cybercrime. We've also done children's books aimed at a younger audience that we have worked with after school programs for kids. We had worked with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and then we worked with, when I taught at Illinois, Mark First, which worked with kids with developmental disabilities and teaching them about safety online and cybercrime. And so right there, you can see kind of a snippet, but it's about Beauty and the Beast. The student renamed them and gave them Fenrir and Annabee, but the Beast practices illegal surveillance of Belle and her father. And if you have children and or are a Disney fan, you know that the Beast has a magic mirror that he can see everything that's going on. So they translated this into, you know, a phone and having all access pass, being able to see everything that was going on. And so it was really clever to be able to do that. So when I do this in cybercrime, it's a civic engagement project. So, you know, they have to explain the crimes within this context, but then we also go out into the community in some way and present them. So they're not just doing it for the class. It's not just something that I see. We are going out into the world. And so it's been really fun to do this with kids because they're really interested. They love the comics. I love comics, right? So I always love when we do the comic ones, but the children's books have been really good too. We've also, these are just a couple examples I have for you, but I've done this for about 4 or 5 years now. And we've also had younger children books. So I have a 6-year-old daughter, and so they would probably be, I would say, maybe 4 to 6, talking about, you know, safety on the internet, even that young. So starting to get kids thinking about, you know, being on their iPad, doing computer games, those kinds of things, and not talking to or accepting messages from people they don't know. So I've really loved doing this. I'm going to stop sharing here and just talk to you for a second. I really love doing this because I think when we think about cybercrime, people are often only thinking about hacking behaviors or identity theft, and it can be a lot more than that. And I also think this has been a really fun way for the students to think about the information and get us to be out in the community. And I will turn it over to my next wonderful panelist.
Thank you, Shelley. Our next panelist is Dr. Jordana Navarro from the Citadel.
Thank you for having me. I am going to talk to you a little bit about how I teach, thanks James, how I merge theory and cybercrime in the classroom. So for a little context, I am at the Citadel. So we are a teaching institution and we don't yet have a research methods component. We do have an intro theory course, but that's really all the students receive, like in-depth analysis. So I try to interweave theory through all my courses, and particularly in cyber, since that's one of the issues we know the field is grappling with, is how to apply these traditional criminology theories to the cyber world. So I am a huge rat supporter. Has caused a lot of heartburn in my network of friends, because not everybody agrees that that's useful. So I'm going to spend a lot of time talking to you about the exercises I use merging rat. And so if you're interested in these assignments, please let me know. You can shoot me an email. I'll put it in the chat box. And Shelley and I have co-authored books on active learning. We both are huge proponents of that too. At the Citadel, the students are PTing at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I have to do whatever I can to keep them awake when they see me, because they've been up for several hours by the time they come into class. So anyways, preview of context where I'm coming from. One of the things I do that I love and I really emphasize shows the nature that cybercrime isn't always this very sophisticated technical offense, is the first thing I have them do is a risk assessment on themselves. And I couch this in that it's academic work, right, to show how they could be suitable targets. And I go over what that means in terms of routine activities theory, but also that it's personally a good exercise for them. A lot of the students that I encounter, at least, and I guess this could be open discussion, have never looked at their credit histories, don't know how to access one, don't know about information that exists online, how it would take all but 15 minutes to find out where you live. And so a lot of my students are also pursuing law enforcement careers, where the agencies that they are particularly applying to, like Charleston PD, will do that deep dive on them, as I imagine most agencies would these days. So this is personally a good exercise for them too. So I give them 30 minutes to basically do a deep dive on themselves and create like a risk assessment of what information could they find in 30 minutes. I've had students not able to complete this. I'll never forget it. It was like one of those life-altering things that happened in the classroom where a student visibly broke down and had to leave. It turns out she had exited a domestic abuse situation and found out her partner had opened a mortgage, her ex-partner had opened a mortgage in her name, and she had to leave. So this is something that's very, again, you know, sometimes students, I feel like we talked about this in our UN panel that several of us recently attended. It's a normalization, if you will, that sometimes they don't remember that, you know, if you're exercising agency and you want to put your information out there, but understand kind of the risk associated with that. And so this activity really brings that home. So we always wrap it up with having a conversation. This also leads into, if you're teaching classes about cyber law, what students agree to, because half of them don't know what a terms of use is, never looked at it, really understood what they're agreeing to. So it gets into conversation about cyber contracts and what those are, what rights you have, that free speech does not exist the way you think it does within social media platforms. They also have rights that you're agreeing to when you establish accounts, that you will abide by certain behavior. So it gets into a lot of conversation, useful conversation that connects to many different courses I would imagine we're teaching. So if you're interested in that activity, let me know. We also do that same kind of analysis, but showing offline and online connections by walking around campus and just watching the physical security that people attach to their electronic devices. So this gets at issues of like shoulder surfing, right? Of how aware people are of their surroundings, dealing with technology and how that can make them vulnerable. Also, if you're teaching obviously any classes in period and you want to look at physical safety or target suitability, that's a great exercise, because anything that gets the students moving and seeing how theory impacts them in their everyday life, I found is particularly meaningful. Movies are great too. I'm teaching crime and media. I have my students for my cyber law class right now watching the film IT. It is a horrible movie. It has not won any Oscars. It probably won a Razzie. It's that bad. It's terrible. But it is great for the purpose of having students watch it and identify every cyber offense they see and explain to you why that's an offense, right? Using the academic definitions, as well as if they were a law enforcement officer and they were going to assign charges based on what they're watching, having them do that and theory. So that is a culminating project in my courses, because it's basically, they have to know enough, right? They have to have that foundational knowledge where they can recognize it. And they're not going to be able to look in a book. That's a challenge to several of us, obviously, in online courses. It's finding innovative ways to tap into, are they looking this up, or do they truly understand? Have they established that understanding where they can apply it to something they're watching? And so that is a great activity. The students hate it. I tried assigning hackers because I love hackers, and they whined that it was dated, and then it destroyed me a little because I remember hackers that I'm old. So, I mean, it's not going to win you a lot of awards on your student evals, but it's great because it can be a culminating project. And then another one that's kind of the same idea is identity thief, excuse me, where it's a comical spin, but still shows you fraud, theory, definitely strain. So that's a great application there. So yeah, I just wanted to present on this and put out there that theory is also important, and there are several innovative ways we can tie it to cybercrime courses. So I will also hang back and answer any questions. And if you're interested in any of the assignments, you can drop me a message in the chat.
Thank you, Jordana. Our next presenter is Dr. James Popham from Wilfrid Laurier University.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour. I'm James Popham. Thank you, Kathy. I'm at Wilfrid Laurier University. We're just outside of Toronto in beautiful Ontario, Canada. I wanted to just speak a little bit about my course and my course design, which I've been working on for about the last 6 or 7 years. It's a course that I inherited when I started up at this institution. We haven't much in the way of cybercrime or related technology crime courses available to our students. So while this is a 4th-year course, I really teach it as an introductory course. As a result, I teach it sort of from a topical standpoint. My goal really in getting through the course is to introduce students to the spectrum of different technology-related crimes that they might encounter as they move on through their careers. And it's oriented toward getting them to think more critically about some of the key components or underlying factors. And so with that in mind, then I've really tried to develop an experiential course. I'm of two minds here. I think I'm going to start quickly by talking about what I did in the so-called before times when we had classes in person, where I really tried to come up with interactive activities to get the students thinking about different ways of thinking about cybercrime. One of the things that I like to start off with really is an introduction to the history of computing. For people of my vintage, I guess, Gen X, computers kind of came midway through my education or my life. And so I still view it as a tool, whereas many of our students now are viewing it as just a natural part of life. And because it's become such a natural part of life and one that's become so optimized over the last 2 decades or so, they tend to miss out on some of the underlying facets of what makes computers tick. My first lesson, I will take an old computer that I have harvested from our IT services, and I will tear it apart and go through it piece by piece, showing them where there are different vulnerabilities in the hardware, as well as some of the software that operates those components. The next thing that I move on to then is sort of just a general understanding of how networks work and the progression from really starting off. And I have an old, my uncle's old, what's it called? Telegraph machine that he would have used for the Boy Scouts back in the 1950s. And I go from telegraphing all the way up to modern network architectures. One of the things that I do is I have the students all stand up in rows, and I give them all rubber balls with just smiley faces on it. And I try to get them to time how quickly the balls go from the front of the class to the back of the class. Sometimes it's a little bit more effective than others because we wind up with balls bouncing all over the room. But that's part of the learning experience. I've also tried different things. One of the things that I've been trying to work on is a bit of a card game that's intended to show students how viruses go between people. I haven't perfected it yet. Last time I ran it, I just wound up with a bunch of confused students standing around. But as I perfect it, I will certainly make it available through our division and the different resources that we have available. I also make use of a lot of hands-on stuff, as I mentioned. So, one of the things that I'll often have when I get to the music piracy section is I'll share this with the students, which is my personal Diamond Rio PNP 300, which is the second commercially released MP3 player. And within that, then, in terms of the assessments beyond the lessons, really, it's focusing on, I guess, if I were to build off of what Jordana was mentioning in terms of a theoretical underpinning, I really focus in sort of the network society perspective, which people like Castell's read about, and try to, again, get the students thinking about the larger integrative nature of technology in our lives. To that end, I give them a podcast assignment, which is laddered into 4 different smaller assignments, starting with just coming up with a proposal, then putting together a work plan, putting together the podcast, and then finally summarizing their findings for a wiki, which I'm, again, just in the process of putting together. Unfortunately, Google Sites has removed their wiki support lately, so I've got to kind of reboot it. And I try to give them a spectrum of different topics to choose from. So I've just pulled up my list from this year. That included why the US should or shouldn't ratify the Council of Europe's Protocol on Xenophobia and Racism, responding to revenge pornography, Kerry Goldberg, and the practice of sexual privacy law, fake reviews are fraud but profitable, can they be stopped, how COVID has affected cybercrime in 2020, that wasn't me, how deepfakes are changing the face of cybercrime, who is Cambridge Analytica and why do they matter, the return of the pirate, will digital piracy make a return in the 2020s? Don't worry, CLOP, detailing the biggest malware events of 2020. Can cybercrime portals work? I4C India, NetSafe New Zealand, and Report Cyber Australia. And can Stuxnet happen again? Malicious software, warfare, and terror in the 21st century. So I'm really trying to get as broad of a spectrum of topics as possible to the students. And I've really found that they really engage in doing these podcasts. They'll put music in the background, they'll invite fake guests, they'll have a back and forth. If you listen to podcasts, there's a whole range of different styles that people will use, and I'll see a lot of them in the podcasts. Rarely have I listened to one and I said, wow, you didn't really try. 99.99% of them are just amazing, amazing pieces of work. Now, with the shift to the remote learning that we've had lately, I've tried to keep that experiential learning going as best as I can. And so one of the initiatives that I undertook the last time I taught the course, which was fall of 2020, I attempted to interview my colleagues to get their thoughts on cybercrime. So I've got a short video here, if you can play it, thank you. So I'm going to get right into our questions here, and I always like to start off with an easy one. How would you like to introduce yourself if you were stuck in an elevator with someone, perhaps a student or another person?
I'd chat with them. I'd say hi and say, well, this seems like a difficult situation. And then probably because of the type of person I am, I would probably actually start discussing different movies and things where people get stuck in an elevator. And
I would probably just say, hi, I'm Shelly. I'm pretty casual with my students. Some of them call me Dr. C, some of them call me Shelly.
As you said, I would kind of introduce myself and my title, and then I would say that I'm mostly studying issues around cybercrime with an emphasis on computer hacking, malicious software, data theft, and illicit markets.
I would say that I'm, Kevin Steinmetz. I'm a critical criminologist, primarily focused in the intersection on culture, technology, crime control, and maybe just general geekery.
If it was to my fellow academics, I'd say, hi, I'm Dr. Mike McGuire, and I research in the area of cybersecurity. I'm particularly interested in the human factors and what makes it possible for cyber criminals to complete what they do.
Great question. Yeah, obviously the context of where the elevator is very important. Yes, I would introduce myself as Adam Bossler at Georgia Southern. And depending on what they're interested in, I'd probably tell them that I do cybercrime research.
No, I'd probably just introduce myself as a social scientist, actually, somebody who's interested in study of social problems. Simple as that, really.
Oh, there's a little bit, okay. This semester I've really tried to, or this past semester I've really tried to make people, or to try to keep these connections going as best as I can, given the limitations that we've experienced. I've got some more thoughts about things like content management systems, etc., but we can talk about that later. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, James. It's been a while since I've seen Adam Bossler, the beard. It seems like the pandemic beard has become very popular with some of the gentlemen in our field. All right, so I'm very pleased to announce our next presenter, Dr. Erica Fissel from the University of Central Florida.
Sorry, couldn't find the unmute button. Hi, everyone. So I have a PowerPoint just because there are a lot of moving parts with this project, so I wanted to just have it on the screen for everyone. So I'm going to be talking about using a role immersion project in my cybercrime course. Oh, so is it on speaker view, Jordana? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was trying to do that discreetly.
No.
Switch your view.
I do that with my students all the time. Okay,
if you can remember to unmute, you're winning compared to me.
I'm like, it's fine if you see my notes, I guess. Is this better? Yes.
I think there should be a button like reverse view, although if it's fine. I just wanted to let you know.
Well, I don't, okay, well, we'll just continue so we don't eat up too much time. But so my class is cybercrime in the criminal justice system. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Criminal Justice. So this class is really couched within talking about criminal justice related issues within cybercrime. And this is for an undergraduate course. So what is role immersion? Really, it's just this practice of having students take on specific roles and then act them out in some sort of case-based scenario for the purpose of learning whatever the course content is or understanding complex concepts that maybe are a little difficult to understand just from reading a textbook. Another term for this is just role playing. It's really common in like history courses and also in foreign language courses, but it is also useful for this cybercrime class. So my project starts really day one. They get information about this role immersion project And they are told that basically they're going to assume a role within a criminal justice agency and work within a small group to find a solution to their assigned cybercrime scenario. And there are three main purposes of this project. The first is to really explore the legal issues regarding policing the virtual environment. The second is to challenge misperceptions and really dive deep into those complexities related to investigating and prosecuting cybercrimes. And then the last is to really think critically about how actors across the criminal justice system work together or don't work together to tackle these difficult crimes. I think a lot of cybercrime classes, depending on the department that they are taught under, really forget this last aspect of how the criminal justice system even handles these types of cases. So the overall project has 5 main assignments. Starting at the bottom is learn your role. Then they do a learn your laws. Then they have the group investigation, a peer rating, which is basically just group participation, and then an individual paper where they reflect upon everything. But for the purposes of this, I'm really just going to focus on these 3 assignments. So I first start by splitting them up into small groups of about 4 to 5 students. And then they all decide as a group what cybercrime that they want to focus on specifically. And they have a list of basically the topics that we cover throughout the class that they are able to pick from. And then within that, they all are assigned a different state as well. So we have 4 to 5 students, each one has a different state, and then they all share that one cybercrime topic that they're interested in. So their first assignment that they're given is this learn your role assignment. So using the state that they were assigned, they are told to select a criminal justice profession from within that state that they need to research and understand. And they're told that this is their role for the role immersion project. So it has to be something that they can find information about. This could be either a specific individual that they assume that role of, or just a profession that they choose to select. And they are told not to necessarily focus on something cybercrime related. I think that would make things a little too easy if they all picked people who are experts in cybercrime and forensic analysts and things like that. So I encourage them, because most of them are criminal justice students, to select a role that they want for their future career. So it's kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You're doing the research for this project, but also they're learning more about an FBI agent, for example, and all these different elements that they might have for that job. So for this assignment, they do, they submit their selected job, their roles and responsibilities, educational background, and organizational characteristics. So these assignments that I'm talking about are spread out throughout the semester. So this one I think is probably due like week 5. So they're building upon each other for that final group scenario that they have to work through. So then they are asked to do this learn your laws assignment 2 weeks later. So using their assigned cybercrime and their assigned state, they need to research the laws in their state related to that cybercrime. And we all probably know that not all states have laws for every type of cybercrime. So they get very creative and look at other laws that could be used to cover that type of cybercrime as well. While they're doing this assignment, I'm creating scenarios for each group based on the roles that they selected and the cybercrime. So it is unique to every single group. So then once all that's done, they have this group investigation. So basically they're told that there's this new federally funded initiative that's been developed where criminal justice agencies work across the country to solve complex cybercrime situations. So I call it a cybercrime task force. And then every person's role and their state that's in that group is listed. So this is an example from one of my groups from the fall. And they're told that they have been assigned their first case. So then they are given a short case description related to their roles, their states, and the cybercrime that they selected. And this is just an example of one. I'm not going to read it to you, but like I said, every group has a unique scenario based on the other assignments. And then they're asked within their task force to basically process and investigate what happened and answer the following questions. So has a crime been committed? How do they know? What was that crime? Do they perhaps need more evidence or information to determine that a crime has occurred? What are some investigative obstacles that their task force might experience? What are ways to overcome those obstacles? What does each member of the task force add to the group? And then the last is really just how would they proceed? They have this case file, what would they do next? And so for this part, the group investigation, they are doing, it's a fully online class, so they recorded a video, and within that video presentation, they assume their roles. So they are speaking as if they are the forensic analyst, or they are speaking as if they're the FBI agent, and within this task force. So they're not speaking as students, they're speaking as their role. And these are just some unsolicited pieces of feedback that students provided. Overall, it was, so I tried this for the first time in the fall and it worked really well. So if it worked for a fully online class during a pandemic, I think it's 2 thumbs up. I was really pleased no one complained about it. But really people just saying that they really enjoyed the assignment because it was different than what they've ever done before. And it really forced them to look at these types of cases from a different perspective. They said things like they didn't realize how cyber crimes could be so easily interconnected with each other, or how there are jurisdictional issues, or how states just don't have laws a lot of times to even use for these types of cyber crimes. So I mean, like I said, overall, really pleased with this. Some pieces of feedback, I would say, if you are going to try something like this, if you have a larger class, maybe you don't want to give students free rein in terms of selecting their roles and their cybercrime, because I had 15 groups, so I had to come up with 15 unique scenarios within like a week or two, which was really difficult because some students picked things like correctional officers or highway patrol, which were a little more difficult to add into the scenario to make it relevant for them to be in that group. So if you have a larger class or a lot of groups, that's just something to keep in mind. But I think it was really interesting as a professor, the person grading the assignments, to do this versus just reading a paper. And it seems like students took a lot out of it too. The other piece of feedback, I know a lot of students hate group work. That's why I assigned it really starting day one. They met with their group that first week and they created agreed upon rules and guidelines for working together. But those that did have issues with their group, make sure you have alternative assignments because it's going to happen. But that is all I have. So that's information if you want to contact me about this project or assignment. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. All right, so last but not least is Dr. Central Bach from the University of Scranton.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen. So everyone can see it. Okay. So my name is Shinchul Baek. I'm an assistant professor at Director of Cybercrime and Cybersecurity Director at the University of Scranton. Last year, University of Scranton launched Cybercrime and Homeland Security Bachelor's Program. Given that currently we are teaching some classes such as cybercrime or cyber intelligence, digital forensic investigation, or ethical hacking, or cyber law, cybersecurity foundation, network security, and homeland security intelligence, so on and so forth. So today I'm going to share one of my teaching experience with a cybercrime class. especially with cybercrime profiling training. So as other, panelists already mentioned that human factors or peoples are one of the most important consideration or factors to effectively to prevent or fight against cybercrime. So it means we need to teach students about the cyber criminals and cyber victims as well. So main purpose of the cyber criminal profiling and training is to give to a criminal justice student or computer science or information technology student a chance to hone their knowledge of cyber criminals and also cyber victims with FBI cybercrime cases or DOJ federal courts cases. On top of that, student can learn or acquire analytical skill set with the SPSS. To that end, student can, it gotta be very suitable for the some students who pursue to become cybercrime investigators or cyber threat intelligence, so and so forth. So how did I teach the cyber criminal profiling for the criminal justice student or computer science student? At the first stage of the cyber criminal profiling training, normally I begin teaching with the definition of a cyber criminal profiling, and then I just give them some idea about the cyber criminal profiles with the typologies or motivation or skill levels or cyber crimes methods as well. And then I just give the student about the theoretical framework with the cybercrime profiling. It's called SS-Becker cybercriminal profiling model, which is I just invented for my part of my dissertation. As you can see the name, my name is Shinchul Beck, right? So you can see the SS-Becker with Shinchul Beck. I know it sounds very cheesy, but it really works for the University of Scranton student. They love it. So you guys can keep in mind, can use it in your state. And so SS-Becker cyber criminal profiling model consists of 3 major factors, such as situational factors or cybercrime opportunity factors, and also socio-demographic background factor as well. So for the situational factors include motivation of the offender, presence of political objective, offenders, victims, geolocation. Cybercrime opportunity factors include presence of co-offenders or cybersecurity countermeasure levels or intimate relationship with the victim, so and so forth. And then I just give the student some of cybercriminal profiling coding book, which is mainly based on SS-Becker's variables. So as you can see, offenders details such as gender, age, occupation, or motivation of the offenders, cybercrime method, and the geographical level, accomplice, as well as victims details as well. At the second stage of the cyber criminal profiling training, students receive a real-life scenario of the cybercrime investigation. For example, students can play a role as FBI cybercrime analyst in Philadelphia, in PA. So basically, he or she is required to provide analytic report with empirical evidence in order to help FBI director to establish effective cybercrime prevention strategy. So it means students need to collect some minimum 30 cases of the cybercrime case from the FBI website, as you can see it on the top, or DOJ, Department of Justice websites as well. And then students need to convert textual context, into numerical or primary data. So, and then they just put those information on the micro Excel file, looks like that, and then switch gear as a SPSS data set. And then student can play around to, to analyze the data. So by the end of the semester, students must provide 10 pages empirical research paper. And also they have to provide 5 minutes presentation, like, the conference style. I know it sounds very heavy duty, but so far so good. Students get done in here in University of Scranton. So I would like to share one of the showcase from my previous student in the cybercrime classes. His name is Owen Mueller. He's a sophomore in the cybercrime homeland security program. As you can see, he just got a title page, introduction, and the literature review. Also, he got a research question and hypothesis. Based on that, he just tried to test, his hypothesis with 30 actual FBI cases. And then he just explained that where he just got the 30 cases for the data collection. And then he tried to point out the descriptive statistics and cross tabulation in order to examine or investigate the relationship between accomplice and geographical level of the cyber criminal's pattern. And then he got a key findings, right? And then he got a finally, conclude his study. And then he provided a policy implication for the FBI director to effectively, reduce the cybercrime phenomenon here in the United States. University of Scranton still doesn't have the graduate program, but I know some of you have the graduate program. So it means you can apply some advanced statistical method, and then you can play around to conduct the research about that. So that's all what I just wanted to share today. So if you have any further question or some concern, just ask me, or you can just email me. I can share all of the contents of the code book, so on and so forth. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Central, very much. So I do want to open it up now to the audience. Does anyone have any questions for an individual presenter or for our panel as a whole? You've heard a variety of amazing ideas, but also covering a lot of different types of topics. If you'd like to electronically raise your hand, you can, and I'll call on you, or you can put your question in the chat box, and I'm happy to read it out. Okay, our first question is from Dr. Albanese. Hi, Jay. I appreciate the creative thinking here. Like those present, I also teach cybercrime, and I'm just smart enough to know there's always something else to learn. That's right. Given the move away from traditional textbooks, for better or worse, does the panel have experience using books by practitioners, the great literature of various reports, or other non-traditional kinds of readings and content in an attempt to reach our students more effectively? So I'll open that up to the panel.
I'll start by saying I use a great cybercrime book by Dr. Kathy Markham, host of this panel.
She is a delight. Thank you, Shelley.
Sure, I use that book, and then I also use some different articles, to supplement throughout the semester, also by usually people who I know, because Cyber Small. Some of which also are on this panel, but that's what I personally use.
I also recently finished teaching cyber in the summer, and I use TED Talks, which I love because some of the TED Talks are previous victims of different types of cyber offenses, previous offenders of cybercrime offenses. So I feel like that rounds out the content that I bring in. I also try to, again, because I'm in a teaching institution and they don't have typical, they're not coming in with a great understanding of research or what we do outside the classroom. So I also show them, like, anytime we participate in, for example, a UN talk or Shelley's webinar, I assign in our cybercrime class talking about intimate partner abuse in cybercrime situations and what that looks like. All of which I can send to, but there is a lot of actually great TED Talks about cybercrime.
Yeah, I do a mix. So I don't use a textbook. I use some articles here and there, particularly with my graduate students. I use TED Talks, other videos that are out there on YouTube, like personal stories. I teach a lot based on personal experiences, not my personal experiences, but from victims' experiences using their voices. So there's a lot of that on YouTube. And then I also use a lot of resources from nonprofit organizations that I work with. They have a lot of videos and fact sheets and things like that that I utilize.
In my case, I sometimes use Jay Albany yearbook, one of the chapter. I just using that. At the same time, I just utilize UNODC's like materials, Interpol materials, and Europol, and also FBI. They have like internet complaint cybercrime center. So IC3 report. Normally, I just utilize for the students to give like a better understanding of the trend of cybercrime.
I guess I'll round it out. Our university has a pretty extensive digital collection. In this past year, what I've done is I've actually taken chapters from a number of different textbooks, including sort of the more autobiographical approaches, and used those as the primary reading assignments. And then this year I moved away from it because I did have a lot more visual content, but in past years, what I'll often do is have secondary readings, which are coming from popular or populist magazines. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff from Wired or The New Yorker or what have you, that is a little bit more accessible to the students, so that even if they aren't doing the readings, you know, we can certainly hope that at least they can gather some of the information from the more accessible writing that you see in newspapers, etc.
Can I ask a question? And Jordana, if you're old, then I'm ancient. So I'm gonna phrase it from that point. I find when I teach, and this is to the whole panel, when I teach cybercrime, it takes research on my end because I am old and I don't use a lot of the different apps and some of the, you know, the behaviors that the young people, as my grandmother would say, but as the college students are using online, that's not something that I do. So can the panelists tell us how you stay, you know, current? What are some techniques that you use to make sure that your material is as contemporary as possible?
I think that's a great point, and jumping off Jay's point too, I'm increasingly finding that not to use a textbook in cyber, just because by the time they are published, it's often, to your point, sometimes it has dated information. And also kind of what James mentioned, I'm not finding they're reading it. Like, that's just not, it's a struggle, right? And I'm sure I'm speaking to everybody who understands that struggle, that they're not reading it. So I'm trying to find material increasingly that they want to engage with, or they can listen to maybe when they're working out or whatever that's suited for their lifestyle. And so in that search to find more relevant information outside of a textbook, that's how I keep myself current, but it is a struggle. I think I mentioned to somebody, I had to look up what GOAT meant. Like, somebody said on my eval, you're GOAT. And I was like, what does that even mean? And so I'm old and I had to, like, that's a struggle. But yeah, so that's how I keep myself current, to your point.
We have to give a nod to all those who might say Gucci as well. It's a little bit disheartening because I'm just finished or just started a contract with Oxford to write a cybercrime textbook. So hopefully you'll all be interested in reading my book when it comes out. One of the things that I want to bring up is I'm, you know, from an introductory standpoint, and I can't speak for upper year courses, I'm finding that the temporality is less of a concern because we do have a lot of background stuff and a lot of concepts that have remained fairly static for the last 30 years. some of the big ones, you know, I think actually right now Facebook is undergoing a DDoS, and that's a concept that's 25 plus years old. It's certainly, I think it's more valuable to have contemporary examples than it is to have necessarily up to the minute discussion about what's happening in cybercrime, because that's ultimately going to be a losing battle. Even for planning out a course within the 4 months between starting the course and its conclusion, there's going to be drastic shifts.
I would agree. I like having a book to use because it's somewhere to kind of send them. And I will, of course, you know, use your book, James, but I like to think that I'm pretty hip. Whether or not that is accurate is debatable. But one of the things that I will do is get my grad assistant to do some research for me. So if there's something, you know, going on, they can give me some of the stuff. Like, I'm not on TikTok. I just can't handle it. I'm just not cool enough or young enough, whatever it is. So I'll ask my grad assistant if I, you know, have one who's, you know, hipper than me. I'll say, hey, can you give me some examples related to cyber or revenge porn or sextortion, whatever it is we're talking about. And I found that's a way, you know, to kind of keep some of that current.
One of the questions I'm always asking my students, maybe you all can answer for me, is what do you know, when you send a tweet to someone, it's a tweet. What's a TikTok to another person? Is it a tick? Because we've got problems with ticks up here.
I don't TikTok, James. That would terrify anyone who saw it. So the wrong person to ask.
I actually have a question for Erica, if I can ask Erica. So the first time I taught cyber law, I attempted to get them into groups, knowing, right, again, speaking to probably the choir here, some of the challenges with groups. So how do you manage that? Because then if so I ended up using a contract that, if anybody is interested in group work, Carnegie Mellon publishes out, which is great. And everybody signed, and I put in there specifically you can be voted off the island kind of penalty. But how did you handle that? Because that's extra stress on everybody.
Yeah, so like I said, I was pretty pleased with how it went, particularly for an online course during a pandemic. But there were certainly challenges. I think the biggest is when I do group work, they make their own guidelines, expectations, and they agree upon that. And I don't do any policing of it, but if someone approaches me about it, then I can address it. All of the assignments except for the group investigation were individual grades. And that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed is if the group work is not a lot of points, it's not as problematic. So I think maybe though, like the learn your law, learn your roles, those were each like maybe 10 or 20 points. The group investigation video was like 50 points. And then the individual paper was 100 or 75 points. So I tried not to put all of the points on the grade or on that group assignment. And I think that helped a lot. But then I was also just very flexible if students were like, my group's not responding or X number of students aren't responding, then I either let them do it individually or broke them up into like 2 and 2, depending on who was participating and who wasn't. That was what I did, and it seemed to work. No one complained about it in my evals. Like I read my evals like this because I expected people to complain and no one did. So I guess it worked. But yeah, I think if they creating their own guidelines has helped a lot in other classes too.
If I can jump on with the group work, in the past, I've given the option for students to go on their own if they decided that they didn't want to work in a group, and it just became a real problem. Because you wind up going from, say, in a class of 30, you'd have 10 assignments to suddenly having 17 or 20 or whatever it might be. what I did in the past year, again, I mentioned in my presentation, making use of the tools that are available to us. We use Brightspace, and you can set up a group so that students can elect to join a group, and you can put a deadline on that. So I gave them 1 week to elect who their group members would be. I shouldn't say elect, but choose who their group members were. And then if they didn't choose someone by day 7, then they'd automatically be assigned to a group. And that seemed to work pretty well for me.
I also gave suggestions on how to do the actual recording of the video. So I said, hey, you could all jump on a Zoom and record. You could do individual recordings if you can't find time for your schedules to match. So I think giving them ideas onto how to work as a group really helped too.
I really liked your idea because I'm teaching cyber law now, so I'm having them do really big cases like the Hulk Hogan invasion of privacy case. And I want to revise it because I feel like it's very legal heavy. And I think your activity might be received a little bit better. So I thought it was really, I'll be emailing you if you wouldn't mind.
And for anyone in the audience, as I said in the chat box, if you'd like a recording of this, I'm happy to email it to you. And if you would like to contact any of the panelists regarding their activities, I can provide those email addresses if you don't already have them. So it is 6, and in essence of time, I'm sure some people are hungry for dinner time or a snack, or it's 5 o'clock somewhere. So I wanted to thank all of the panelists for participating, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your do's and don'ts, and we appreciate it very much. And we hope to get you on here again in the fall for another workshop.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.